And now for our first guest on this hour, Upendra Tripathy is the Interim Director General of the International Solar Alliance, and he joins us remotely from Mumbai. Upendra, great to have you on this very special platform here. Now, Upendra, let me begin with the mission of International Solar Alliance. For those not familiar with it, how did it come to be, and what are the key objectives?
Well, thank you. In fact, the International Solar Alliance is an innovative experimentation by India and France. On 30th of November 2015, it was launched in the Paris summit of COP21. So far, 46 countries have signed in a span of 2 years, and at Marrakesh, the agreement was open for signature. And as of today, 19 countries have ratified, and I'm happy to announce that tomorrow, that is on 6th of December 2017, the framework agreement comes into force because 15 countries have ratified. We become a legal entity, international, intergovernmental, headquartered in India. And our mandate is very simple. We would like to have a financial investment of $1,000 billion in the solar sector by 2030. It essentially boiled down to 1,000 gigawatt of solar. And to this end, we have 5 areas of activity: innovation, R&D, aggregation of demand and risk, capacity building, and other associated technology application work. And we are on the right track. So far, we have launched 5 programs. Out of that, 3 are almost in action. We have almost more than 15 countries participating. The first program is about replacement of diesel pumps with solar, or solar pumps in off-grid areas. The second program we have got is mobilizing or scaling up solar finance. And the third one is on mini-grids. The 2 programs that are going to come are rooftop in small island countries and other member countries. And the 5th one will be e-mobility and storage.
Right. Upendra, you did mention that you've already got the ratification which was needed because 15 member countries had to ratify it. You had 19. So that deal is done. But tell me about how this will help you accomplish the goal of 1,000 gigawatts by 2030, because that is an ambitious target. What are the kind of milestones you have in mind?
See, we have essentially examined that, most of the countries in their NDCs have mentioned about solar. The way the tariff is coming down, solar is becoming very popular. And the future of solar lies in that it is relatively becoming, getting grid parity, it is becoming cheaper, it is more universal. You can have a distributed generation of solar. And on its own, if you look at the investment that is coming around out of the $250 billion last year in the renewable energy sector, $150 billion has gone to solar. And in many countries, solar is picking up, both in the off-grid areas and the grid-connected areas. So we plan that there are 4 areas that the ISA can address. One is the availability of land in the member countries, and second is the issues of capital. Third is technology, and 4th is manpower. So very systematically, in fact, on 6th of December, that is tomorrow, we have invited officers from 25 member countries who are all assembling in Delhi. And over a period of 10 days, we are developing a solar roadmap for these 25 member countries, addressing the issues of land, labor, capital, and technology. The idea is to aggregate demand. For example, I will give you one example. India wants 100,000 pumps. Uganda wants 30,000 pumps. Bangladesh wants 50,000 pumps. So ISA is taking the aggregation of these demands and planning to issue a price discovery tender, whether the prices can be brought down. The idea is the issues of training the youth in solar technologies, entrepreneurship, startups, innovations. They're very popular with the political leaders, and they're very popular in the society in most of the member countries. So ISA is trying to focus, keeping in view that you need, the most critical thing is the capital for this solar sector, and we focus on all the 4 areas that are required. And that is how we plan that by 2030, 1,000 gigawatt can come in.
Right, let's talk about the capital investment, because you talked about, again, a very ambitious figure there of $1,000 billion. But now, how will you raise this in tranches, and how will you raise money on a global investment basis?
Well, as you know, ISA is a platform and it is a collective body. And so far as finance is concerned, we are not a bank. So the idea is not that we get money and disperse. The idea is how do you bring in capital to this sector? We have very clear policy and we have taken very clear steps. As step one, we have joint declarations with the World Bank, with the European Investment Bank, with the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. We are planning to have similar financial understanding or joint declarations with Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, International Islamic Bank. The idea is that we believe that these multilateral banks can actually be champions in getting credit into this sector. How do they do that? Number one, we believe that with the help of Green Climate Fund and with the help of these multilateral banks and leading countries, we can create a large chunk of risk mitigation funds. You know, these are the funds that will actually leverage capital from the private sector. Number two, we appeal to these banks that they can earmark a percentage of their credit, say at least 10% for the solar sector. That will give a very clear roadmap to the industry. Number three, we believe that a lot more green bonds can be raised in these countries, in the member countries, and we do need to very consciously try to have more green bonds. And number four, we also request that if money can be raised by these multilateral banks in the domestic currency, for example, in India in rupees, and they can be lent out, so the foreign exchange risk, the hedging risk cost can go down, and that way the cost of capital can be brought down. This is only one way. And the other thing we think is that at least over 10 years, some $300 billion of risk mitigation fund can be created. And for each dollar of money that you invest in risk mitigation, 10 times that money comes into the solar sector. Sounds a little crazy, talking about $300 billion. But if you think that we have $78 trillion economy in the world, and over a period of 10 years, given the benefits, such risk mitigation funds have to be done, and that is a necessity. And that is what ISA is planning in a financial plane, to mobilize the support of all financial actors and create mechanisms so that money is leveraged from the private market into the solar sector.
So we have to aim high. And on that point, Upendra, talk about how you convince all the decision makers on solar, as well as the energy policy of India, to understand that investing in solar is actually strengthening Indian economy.
Well, in fact, if you look at the Indian policymakers, the very fact that they have taken the lead in creating the International Solar Alliance. In fact, the other day, the Honorable Minister, Indian Minister for Power, stated that it is not 175,000 gigawatt that he's aiming at by 2022. He actually wants to exceed that to 200 gigawatt, and that itself shows the commitment of the Indian policymakers. And the Indian Prime Minister, has been playing a very important role in the field of renewables, because he says that even if the Indian economy doesn't directly benefit from exporting of these products, for the sake of climate, India must commit itself to renewable energy. And it's very good that the cost of renewable energy, as Mr. Al Gore said, has come down to below grid parity, which is a very good thing. And given this, it is a win-win thing for India. It creates more employment, it gets more investment, and it is also good for the environment. So given this win-win-win scenario, the Indian policymakers have been quite committed to this scenario of enhancing the capacity of renewable energy in India.
And there's an overarching social objective to this as well. So we've discussed the economic aspect, but Upendra, solar could be the means through which India manages to give out power to the millions of poor, millions of the rural population who still don't have access to this basic facility.
You are right. In fact, if you talk about the villages, still there are 18,000 villages in India which hadn't got access to electricity, and that was a year back. By November 2019, the Indian government has promised that all the villages in India will be electrified, and 3,000 of these 18,000 villages will be electrified through renewables, mostly solar. But the problem comes, suppose I give you an example of a village. Even if the village is electrified, the number of people who actually have access to electricity is around 7%. So in a country like India, and similarly in other countries, the definition of electrified village doesn't ensure that there is 100% access of people to electricity itself. And that requires a second policy revolution where you actually bring in the purchase power within the population so that they can access to the grid nearby, or they can go to a distributed form of energy, which is also becoming quite popular. So given the size of India and the huge population which still has to access to energy and electricity particularly, it is a challenge, but they are on the right track. The way solar is catching up in terms of home lighting systems, solar street lighting systems, it is really becoming very attractive and very noticeable. I had been to an island, Sundarbans, where the solar street lights, solar lighting in schools has really created a sort of revolution in an area when there is no electric grid still present.
Right, and there are lots of hospitality projects and resorts as well using that as a USP of theirs. But Upendra, just talk a little bit about the diversity of India and how you will fit a solar financial architecture within that. Because we spoke about the size and scale and the different needs that India is tackling with. So the financial framework, does it manage residential, commercial? What kind of project gets the focus?
Well, if you look at India, in fact, the first experiment India did was something called the Renewable Energy Invest in 2015. And two unique things happened at that point of time. First one, they called the corporate sector and took some commitments in writing as to how much that particular industry was trying to install in India in terms of capacity, in terms of megawatt. And in Reinvest 2015, some 477 companies came and they revealed their preferences for installing a total of 277,000 megawatt. And that shows if you give freedom to these companies and the banks provide the loan component, then renewable energy alone can come up to 300,000 megawatt in India.
Upendra, amazing opportunities there, and thank you so very much for joining us with those insights. I know we can carry on this conversation, but we are running tight on this 24-hour of reality.